Well, hello there out there in LinkedIn. It's Friday afternoon, and I'm just checking to make sure that we are broadcasting. Um, and it's always a delay on LinkedIn, so I'm not seeing it there, but um, people are waiting for us. Okay, we are broadcasting, but okay, here we go. So hello there. Thank you so much for joining us. Say hello. Let us know where you are. Please do feel free to comment, as we will be able to see your comments here, and we'll be able to respond to you live. If you have questions for Paula, she's here. So, please do feel free to ask questions. I'm Annette Richmond, host of this Smarter Career Moves LinkedIn Live. And I want to ask Paula, I'm so excited to have you here, joining me, and tell us a little bit about your business, what you do.
Sure. My business is Strategic Career Coaches, and I've had the business for 6 years now. I'm a former recruiter, and what I do is I'm a certified professional resume writer and certified employment interview consultant. So I help people, I draft resumes, LinkedIn profiles, cover letters, and then I also do a lot of interview coaching. So helping people get prepared, present themselves, the best they can for those interviews.
Oh, okay, great. So, thank you for the compliment. We appreciate that. Somebody says that they cannot hear us. Can everybody else hear us? Have to hit unmute on the screen? I don't know. I've never had this problem before.
Mine shows mute is not, obviously that's on your end.
I don't see any place to hit unmute on the screen. I've never had this problem before. So nobody can. Oh, okay. So Adrian. So Adrian, you were talking to the person who couldn't hear us. Is that correct? Can everybody hear us now? Okay. So I'm trusting that everybody is able to hear us now. Okay, great. So why don't you start all over again, Paula?
Sure.
Just so
Absolutely.
everybody can hear you.
So I'm a certified professional resume writer and interview coach. So I work with clients one-on-one, helping them either with their resume and their written materials, or with their interview preparation and interview. I do a lot of mock interviews. I do a ton of interview coaching.
Well, I was so excited when you said yes. I've known you, through the NRWA and through LinkedIn, but you did a presentation at the conference that we had, a few weeks ago, and I was just floored by all the things I learned about interview coaching. I do a little myself, but I learned so much from you. And, one of the things that I think is just crazy, but people feel like they can go into a job interview and they just kind of wing it. They feel like, I know my stuff and I'm just going to go in there and prep. I'm not going to prep. I'm not going to worry about researching the company. And so, we know that preparation is essential. It really is important. When I was working as a recruiter, which I did for a couple of years before I was full-time resume writing, I would always ask everyone if they, what they knew about the company. And some people would actually say, well, no, I don't really know anything, which is like obviously the wrong answer. While some people were really excited about the company, like maybe they read the magazine. I was worked for a publisher for a little bit as a consultant. And, I would share that obviously with the hiring manager in my little report that I gave to them. So, and that would sway sometimes the hiring manager to want to interview them. So let's start by talking about, researching the company, before you go in for the job interview.
Sure, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and that is such a huge part as a former recruiter, that people would come in, and it really is your chance to set yourself apart from others. So if you're not doing that, I mean, you're missing the boat, because it's an easy thing to do to help you stand out, and that's such a big part of interviewing, is standing out. So company research, I mean, everybody can go to their website and kind of read their mission statement. I think going above and beyond is digging deeper. So really looking into, okay, maybe you go to Google and just Google news articles by that company, and really try to find out, okay, what are some challenges that they're facing right now? Who are some of their competitors? Go a little bit deeper to kind of learn about them, and then you can talk to it a little bit more intelligently in an interview. If you're just kind of spewing out their mission statement or nothing, like you mentioned, that's just a missed opportunity to really have a business conversation with another business person.
It's funny. I was just listening to another LinkedIn Live actually before I joined you, for this one, and somebody was a recruiter was saying, sometimes I would talk to candidates and I'd say, well, how did you come to apply for this job? And they're like, well, I just saw the job ad. It's like, okay. And it's just it sets such a bad example if you haven't even taken the time to interview the company. And I hear you on Google. There's so much there. You'd be surprised, and you can be sure that they're Googling you. So you want to be prepared for that. So
right. Another little tip about the company research is to think a little bit more locally too. I mean, oftentimes us resume writers and career coaches, we work with people all across the United States.
Yeah.
But to drill it down to your local economy, you can go to your Chamber of Commerce, or like I'm in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and we have the New North Corporation, and it's basically an economic development company or platform.
Okay.
And you can go on there and find out lots of information about different companies. So think about it that you can also bring it down a little bit more granular to your regional area. Mm-hmm. And that means talking to your neighbors. That means going to the chamber, looking at the chamber's website. That means talking to maybe some people who are in those connected fields, like your hairdresser, your real estate agent, people who really know kind of okay, what's going on at such and such company.
Yeah, that's so true. People always think about, or a lot of people tell me, friends of mine say, oh, I hate networking. But what they don't realize is we're always networking.
Mm-hmm.
How do you find the new hairstylist or the massage therapist, or, the better little Italian grocery to shop at accessible goods? You do it from networking. You ask people that you know. And so, just building those relationships can really make such a difference. Mm-hmm. And, also it's, you want to be interviewing, researching the interviewers, the people that you're going to meet with. And today there's so many companies, they have just about everybody that works there. They have a bio on the website. So I would think, you can go there and what do you suggest? Where should people look to interview the interviewers, and, what should they look for?
Yeah. So for researching the interviewers, I mean, I think LinkedIn's huge. That's just a lot of people like us are active on LinkedIn. They're publishing articles, they're commenting on things. You can see all of that on somebody's feed. So it'd be a great place to first start to learn a little bit more about them. Maybe you find, okay, so then the second thing would be those bios that you mentioned. That's another great area, the company bios. I would also Google their name and the company name. I had a client who did that a couple weeks ago, and he Googled his interviewer and a company name, and he came up with an award that this gentleman received. I think it was about maybe 5 years before. And it was an award that he didn't even know the company was really into sustainability, and that they were kind of trying to move in that direction of using more sustainable goods or product for making their products. It was a manufacturing company. And so that was really crucial. He learned more about that person who received that award for a particular project that they worked on. And that was something that he could speak to and talk about in that interview to really kind of build that, like you mentioned, build that connection. Mm-hmm. So it was going above and beyond, plus building that connection with that other person.
And I bet it made the interviewer feel really proud, mm-hmm. Right? Not only that the person had done the research, but reminding them of, winning award. Who doesn't like to talk about the awards that they've
Exactly.
won, right?
Right, exactly. Good point.
So I just want to mention, I see in the comments, hello, Paula originally from Bridgeport, another Paula watching us. And Kamala, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. So she says that would be my hope, but it's hard to get past the HR interview, and that is often checkbox questions. So, do you have any suggestions for getting past that HR?
I think it's tricky. I don't know exactly what she's talking about, but if it's really that assessment interview, that first one where they're looking for really particular skills, that's hard because if it's kind of almost yes no questions. Do you know this software? Do you know this? Do you have experience with this? If you don't have those, it's really hard to bridge that gap. What I would suggest is really trying to upskill. So that means maybe, like, for example, let's say you don't know, I'll just pick something easy like Microsoft Word. Can you get that skill in a weekend? So could you take a bunch of courses online? Some could be free, some could be paid for to really help you gain that skill. So trying to bridge that gap, or maybe you could gain some volunteer experience. So maybe you don't have experience in your current job doing a certain type of sales, but you could go get some of that with a volunteer organization who's allowing you to do that for free, or a internship, or helping your neighbor with something. So I think that first interview can be tricky. That's really, sometimes it's the yes no if it's an assessment type interview.
No, that's great. I appreciate that. I hope that was helpful. If anyone has questions, please do put them in the chat, because we are able to read it here, and would certainly want to try to answer the questions. I love that you brought up mentioned volunteer, because people often think of work as work, paid work, but you can also build skills and learn a lot. So you can hear my dog in the background there. He wants to comment. If you can talk about, oh my goodness,
You're talking
if you talk
about
about
volunteering.
volunteer, how can you kind of work that into the job interview? If people are talking about some experience that maybe you don't have, what's a good way to position volunteer work, maybe even volunteer work that you've been doing while you've been sort of unemployed?
Right. And I don't think that you necessarily have to mention that it's volunteer work. I mean, if it comes up and if they ask about it, of course, you're going to be 100% honest. But skills are skills. And if it's relevant for that next job, that's absolutely relevant to bring that up. So I think when they say, give me an example of a time where you did this, you can pull from those volunteer experiences. You can pull even from 2 jobs back if that's relevant. Some people think, oh, I don't have anything, from the last 10 years. But if your target is a different role, and it's relevant, I think you can pull some older, maybe not 30 years ago, but some older information into there that kind of ties that picture and maybe bridges that gap. And speaking of bridging the gap, so another thing to do with that would be to bring in something that maybe you don't have that skill. So for example, it's an accounting software that you've never worked with, but your company used a different accounting software. So point out to them, like, we use this software. I hear it's very similar. When I first had to learn such and such software, I learned it very quickly. I took the book home. I did some work on the weekend. So you can show that you're willing to go above and beyond. You did some extra things and it came to you pretty quickly, and you are confident in yourself. Showing that confidence in yourself can go a long way, that I can learn this and I'm going to have no problem coming in and hitting the ground running with this.
Yeah, I love that. Being adaptable, flexible, proactive are all things. I hear often that people talk about, you can teach skills, but you can't teach like characteristics or character or whatever you want to call it. Someone who is a particularly like a go-getter,
Right.
although, you don't want to be using that word, but, someone who really does step forward and, being proactive about what they do is really really a great asset. So Nesma has said that she's talking goes to job interviews and has she's a great fit for it. and sometimes even overqualified, but she doesn't hear back, even if the interview went well. What tips do you have for following up? I mean, I know that people are often, when I was looking for a job myself, I was concerned about following up, and you don't want to stalk them. But first thing, how can you end maybe the interview to get a feel of what next steps or whatever, and some tips for following up.
That's such a crucial point. I'm glad you brought it up. So first thing, when you end the interview, if you say something like, when will you be moving people on to the next stage, or when do you think I'll hear more? And then trying to get an answer from them. They might give you a range and say, oh, we're not sure. We're going to try to wrap this up within the next 2 to 3 weeks or something like that. And now they're not saying that. With the hiring environment right now, let's just shorten that. They're going to say like, okay, it could be like 3 days. So then you say, okay, is it okay, count forward in your mind. Is it okay then for me to follow up with someone on Wednesday? And so you're asking for permission during the interview. And then when you call on Wednesday, which really do call, when you call on Wednesday, or I'd say try to call. They might not take their call, but at least try to get a message of somebody that you can leave a message for and show how enthusiastic you are on that phone call. So have them try to grant you permission, then follow through to show that you're really doing what you said you're going to do. And then what I would say is I find it far less that, like you mentioned, people are worried about being pushy, and they're worried about turning recruiters off. And I will tell you that most recruiters say that's not pushy to them. The squeaky wheel sometimes gets the grease. Yeah. And it's okay as long as you do it in a very positive, upbeat manner. So I'll tell my clients, when you do follow up, then you should, keep it light. Hey, this is Paula Christensen. I interviewed back on such and such date for the such and such role. I'm still very interested. Just wondering where you are in the process. Because I don't know about you, Annette, but I found that sometimes when people would follow up, they sounded a little bit irritated. Like they would say some things like, I haven't heard anything. And you could hear the irritation in their voice. And because they were. So I just be aware of your tone when you're leaving that message, because you just want to keep it as, I'm still interested. I'm still looking for feedback, still hoping that I'm in the process. If anyone could give me a call back, I'd really appreciate it. What are your thoughts on that, Annette?
No, I agree with you. And I did learn when I was a recruiter, which was part of the reason that I stopped being a recruiter, is, recruiters are in the middle. You're working for the employer. If you're corporate, you're working at the company. If you're contingency, you're being paid to find someone to fill the position. So, you're still working for the employer. And it's really, really, difficult. The recruiter is in the middle, and hiring managers, many of them, they're already busy, particularly if they're short staffed. And so they are very busy doing their job and finding someone new, getting back to the recruiter, or, maybe the candidate. It's just something else on their plate. And I think it's also important to remember that, and that's part of it. They're on a different timetable than you are. So they, I know when I was looking for a job, particularly with a job I really wanted, I wanted to know like now, or tomorrow, or in 2 days, because I was so eager. And they have other things that they're on their plate, and they are, they're just not on your timetable. So Kamala asks again, are thank you notes still good? So what do you say, Paula?
Absolutely. Email, I usually say within 24 hours. If you interviewed in the morning, try to get that out by the end of the day. If you interviewed in the afternoon, the next morning is acceptable. Some people do email and snail mail letters, but right now with everybody being remote, those snail mails are maybe not getting to people. So I think companies, I would say for sure do the email. Right now, you don't know if that snail mail letter is going to land on their desk or not. And then here's the thing about thank you notes. So some recruiters will kind of roll their eyes like it's not really meaningful to them. It's
Yeah.
similar to cover letters. And so they say that because they're boring and people just write the same exact thing in the thank you note. So when you think about your thank you note, be strategic. If you forgot to mention part of your pitch, for lack of a better word, in the interview, something didn't come up, a skill that you have or a expertise that you have, put it in your thank you note. Maybe you can explain something, or maybe something didn't go that well, and you can say, hey, I don't feel like I answered this question very well, and here's some more background on that. So it's your opportunity, and think about it that way. Opportunity to stand out from others, opportunity to explain something that didn't go very well, or an opportunity to add in more information that might help differentiate you from somebody else.
Yeah, I agree with you. For every recruiter and hiring manager that says, I never read cover letters, or, oh, the thank you note doesn't matter, you will find another one who says, yes. I've talked to people who have said, you know what, I got the thank you note, or I really saw something in the cover letter that piqued my interest. And you don't know. You don't know who the receiver is, if they're interested or not. So, why not just err, on the side of caution? Why not just to go there with that? So, I agree with you 100%. And Tom, hi, Tom, our buddy Tom says being assertive is certainly different than being aggressive, and that is true too. You don't want to be calling them every single day, but, you should be following up. So Tom says, we need to remember today's typical recruiter can have 25 plus open positions to fill. Follow up and thank you notes can be vital in moving things forward. Yes, obviously. Yeah, obviously we agree with you. And thank you for that, Tom.
Yeah, especially right now, like he brings up a good point. I mean, they're so overworked right now. Tom will probably know this, but I read some statistic about, I think there's more recruiter openings right now than ever, period. So like in the country. So they're extremely short staffed. If anybody, I'm sure everybody right now kind of gets that because of the staffing shortages across the country.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Things are just certainly not back to normal, or even back to whatever our new normal is going to be, at this point. And there's so many open positions. And I've read statistics that I'm sure you have as well, that a fairly large percentage of employers are influenced by like a thank you note, but hardly anybody ever sends them.
Wow.
And I don't know why. I think more people do send cover letters than thank you notes, but it boggles my mind as well that so many people just, it's a missed opportunity.
Agreed.
And you have to make the most of every single opportunity that you have, when you're looking for a job. So
and it's all those little things that add up.
Yeah.
So maybe it's making sure your resume doesn't have grammatical errors, plus writing a thank you letter, plus talking with somebody else, plus, having a great elevator pitch. All these little things really add up to making a difference in a job search and shortening the time that you're job searching.
Oh, absolutely. It's even things like, being nice to people when you do, obviously, most interviews are, virtual. I think, they're probably increasing in person, but they're still, it's only the final people that are likely going to be going in, for the face-to-face. When I was recruiting a decade ago, they were already doing a lot of virtual, even for local candidates, just because it's so much more convenient. But, it's so important to go in and be nice to, you don't know who is going to talk to the receptionist, or, who you're riding up in the elevator with, or who's standing next to you in, in the ladies' room while you're, washing your hands and, just fluffing yourself up before you go in. So, could be the interviewer. You just never know who it's going to be. So Tom says that they see about 30% of candidates sending thank you notes. Okay, great. So,
so sad.
So somebody says, what? That's the easy part. you've already established a relationship. So I'm not sure. I'm not
I think
I'm not sure if that's a comment or a question. And yes, Tom, I agree with you, and I'm sure Paula does as well, that you have to send a different thank you note to each person. You don't want it just to be cookie cutter, because you don't know that someone might, I might not go in and say, "Hey, Paula, look at the great thank you note that I got
right.
from Tom," and you go, "Oh, that's the same thing.
Yes.
That's the same thing that I got." And here's somebody
Exactly.
says, when I was hiring, I used to man the front desk. So I'm guessing that might be to just check people out as they came in. We've
Well,
all,
or like you said, be nice to everybody. So
yeah.
when I used to be a recruiter, everybody would add to the interview documentation for a person, and it started when you really kind of turned in that application. So, you turned it in electronically. Anyone you called would add notes to that, and the receptionist added notes to it when you walked in the front door. It wasn't about what you were wearing or anything like that. It was about how you treated them. They
Oh,
didn't have to write it, but a lot of times they did if someone was not nice or if someone was exceptionally nice. So just that's all part of they know that's how you're going to represent their company when you're walking around in the community.
yeah. And that's so true. And what does it cost to be nice? Nothing. To
Right.
show respect to everybody that you meet. And I picked up on something that you had said earlier, or something about negativity. And I have actually worked with clients who, when I'm doing a little bit of interview coaching with them, and they're starting to answer that, why do you want to leave? Why are you leaving your company? It's like, well, they offered me, they told me they were going to give me this professional development, and they just didn't. And, it's overworked, and they're making me do so much. And I'm like, no, 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 you cannot say that. If
Right.
your boss is like the devil incarnate, you cannot do that during the job interview, because, I think people wonder, what are you going to say about them? And then, who wants to work with that person? Right.
Right. It's hard
So,
to come back from that. Anytime you say anything really negative about somebody else, that's why if you read job articles about what not to do in an interview, it usually talks about bad mouthing your employer or coworkers. It's so hard to make that come off. Like, no matter what, you as the person who's saying those words, it reflects negatively upon you, no matter what kind of situation. I mean, there are ways to do it, but it's very tricky fine line of kind of like getting your message out without sounding negative yourself. So 100% agree with you that's just not something that you want to be doing.
and I have actually, I have talked to in another life, when I was interviewing people as a writer, talked to CEOs who said that, well, I Google everybody that I'm going to be interviewing, and they don't like to see negativity there either. They don't like to see
Yeah.
that even if you're that person that, every single place you go to, you're complaining about every restaurant is bad. That's the same thing of having that just negative, putting that negativeness out there. I think can just really work against you.
Right. And it's really, really traumatic to go through a job loss. So if you're terminated or laid off, that is trauma. And so sometimes I've had clients who come to me who haven't worked through that trauma. And I'm not a psychologist, and I don't want to be and don't pretend to be, but there have been clients who really what they needed was therapy to get through that before they interview. And not everybody has the luxury of, taking time to do that. But I'll tell you that can, just skipping over that step sometimes does people a disservice, because then they go into the interview just like you're saying, and it comes through. And so if you're in that situation where you've been fired and you have that trauma, or you've been laid off, or had trouble making your mortgage, you getting through some of those feelings can be very helpful before you go on the interview.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Obviously I agree with you completely. So, as we're as we're just talking about that, what are some ways for people just to answer, say it's not something traumatic, but it's just the fact that, they wanted to have more opportunity. They asked for stretch assignments. They weren't getting it. They realized they're kind of not
Mhm.
going anywhere. And, how do people answer that? Why are you wanting to move on?
I think this kind of formula can work for a lot of the sticky wicket questions, which is what I call it. I'm not going to remember her name. Susan. Oh my God, so famous. I probably have a book of hers right here. It'll come to me while we're talking. But as far as I know, she's the one I learned of the sticky wicket. So a sticky wicket question is anytime something's a little bit like, okay, you have to explain something that could be construed as negative, and there is like a part of it that could be. So what I like to do is think about a train, and you bring the train to the stations and you address it a little bit very quickly. So like in your instance, what you just said, Annette, like I'm really ready for more. I'm finding in my current job, I'm not getting the assignments that I would need in order to build out my skills. And when I saw your job, and then move the train out of the station. So you spend just
Yeah.
a little bit of time in the mud, and then
Mhm.
you move along and explain why their job is perfect for you and why you're ready for it, and be confident in your skills and how you're ready to take on more. So it's all about future thinking. So it's
Mhm.
about what you can do for them and how you know that this is going to be great for you for that next job, but not staying in the weeds. So staying in the weeds is too much time into why they're not giving you the assignments and how you've tried and why it's not working. And I don't know about you,
Yeah.
Annette, but there are many people that would spend minutes talking about that mud, and which could be said in 1 minute, or excuse me, like 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and then spend the rest of your message on the forward thinking.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Thank you. And, have often said to people that, you can talk yourself right out of a job, during the job interview, if you're saying the wrong things, but also if you're just talking too much. And people do tend to do that. And one of the things that I'd love for you to share when you were talking about the tell me about yourself. And people do that. And I was just listening the show I was listening to earlier, somebody saying, well, you ask people a question and they're just talking it on and on and on and on. And it's like, you're rolling your eyes and they keep going and they just don't realize. I think that's partly because they're not prepared. But I know you have some great tips for, just not doing that.
Right. So the tell me about your question is such a stressful question for many people. And it's, I believe, because it's so broad. So it's really, where do you start? And I agree. People start way back. They talk too much. They get flustered. They're talking about all these different things. So the trick I like to use for that is to really try to condense it and just think about this role. And what are they looking for in this job? So hopefully they have a well-written job description that explains that. If not, research other job descriptions in that same role, in that same industry, and try to find out, maybe pick out the 3 to 4 skills needed and really what they're looking for in this job. It could also be just qualities needed. And then center your message around those qualities. Yes, it says tell me about yourself. So you want to have a little bit of your background, maybe a couple sentences of where you've come, how that experience has built you to this point where you're ready for this next job. But really think about it under the lens of those 3 to 4 things that they want the most, and how you're going to help them with those 3 to 4 things because you have that experience.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I've heard another friend of mine who's also specializes kind of in the interview coaching, and she has said that you can think about even the stories that you're sharing don't necessarily have to be from your most recent position, but to think of and have those different stories even from different positions, and just each one of them plays a part in kind of the play of the job interview. My friend Kathy Robinson, she has that's kind of her thing that she talks about, and I'm sure that you would agree with that. That's kind of what you're saying as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm saying it's similar to when we write resumes. So you're thinking about those keywords that are important for that job. So all professional resume writers are looking for, okay, what are the keywords that we want to have for the applicant tracking systems, but also for the human reader? So I think when you're thinking about those keywords and those themes for that particular job, I mean, if you're going for a job, you should be able to kind of identify, okay, what are the 3 to 4 things most needed for this job? But if you can't, then look at the job description, and maybe I've asked that. Usually I start out my interview coaching sessions with clients asking them that. I say, okay, let's talk about what's needed for this role. And you'd be amazed. A lot of times I feel like people sometimes are off base. They will say things and then I'll say, okay, that's interesting. Let's build on that list. Let's look at the job description that you sent me. And maybe I noticed on that job description that it says negotiation 7 times. And so like, I think negotiation is pretty important for this job. And I'm not saying that if you haven't done negotiation in your past jobs that you should lie about that. But what I'm saying is recognize that it could be important and that part of your message should be around how you would be able to do that.
Yeah, no, so we have we have quite a few people watching us, and I'm looking at some of the questions here, and one person asked, are things changing for remote now? That's my difficulty in finding I guess it means a fit remote, a good fit that's remote. So do you have any suggestions? I'm not sure if it's to find remote or if you're discussing remote. So
yeah, I don't know either. I mean, I think maybe it might be about determining if it's a good fit when you're interviewing remotely and when you might be working remotely. And
okay.
I would agree that's so much harder. You know, I think just doing your research, really asking thoughtful questions at the end about the company culture, about the team dynamics, getting to know as many people as you can throughout the process. But it's tricky. I'll agree that trying to find that fit remotely is harder.
Well, you know, I have to share that actually one of the worst jobs, full-time remote. Okay. We're not sure. That's what somebody else thinks that means. But so one of the last corporate position I had, I actually got the job through referral. A friend of mine worked there. I spoke with them over the phone. They were eager to have me, you know, just jump right on board. And I made the mistake of taking that job without going into the office. And when I got into the office and I saw how everything was with these tiny little spaces everybody had and just the atmosphere, you know, my gut immediately told me this was not a good fit for me. It was a really bad fit for me, but I was already there. So you know, it's important to go in there and, you know, take a look around and really see what it's like. So somebody else wants to know, how to make a good impression with the recruiter. So maybe you might want, I don't know, bring them some donuts, but probably not.
Well, one thing we kind of touched on that I think could be important is right off the bat, making a good impression could be that connection. So if you did some research on that interviewer and you noticed that they were a fan of a certain sports team and you are as well, I mean, don't lie about it. Or like I mentioned, that client who did research about the award that the person had earned. So really trying to build that connection, it's hard because you're nervous. But anything you can do to kind of like, maybe you notice something in their background that I had a client that had that, it was like a sports thing that was in the interviewer's background. And they said, oh, I realize you're a fan of the Bucks. And then they said, oh yeah. And then they kind of, you know, he could talk to it. And so I would say anything you could do to kind of build that connection, that's really huge right away. That's a great way to make the interviewer like you. And, you know, likability is such a huge part of interviewing. And it's something that people don't really love addressing because it can seem kind of like a popularity contest. So it can bring us back to those high school days where you're like, oh my gosh, you know, clicks and popularity and I wasn't liked. But they've done studies that people like to be on teams and like to hire people who they like and who they trust and who they want to get to know. So likability, whether or not we want to address it or not, is a factor in the interview. And I think a big part of doing that is forming those connections. So it could be connecting over something little that the interviewer has. It could be telling a story that's going to resonate with them. I think a big part about building trust is actually in a tough interview question, admitting some faults. So you could admit that you had sometimes it's a straight out question. Well, they'll say, give me an example of a time you failed. So admitting, yes, not stepping around it and saying, oh, I'm a perfectionist and,
Yeah,
trying
that
to
phony stuff.
disguise things, right? But actually admitting, don't pick a huge one that cost you your job. Don't pick a major red flag, but admitting something that you did that you learned from and can improve on and gained perspective on, that can be huge because your interviewer has likely been there themselves. They've had failures, they've had times projects went off the rails. So telling that story and showing that growth and engagement that growth and evaluation can create engagement, and engagement leads to likability.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think you're so right. So we have another question.
Awesome.
Someone got a call but the schedules didn't align, and they said they were moving on with another candidate. So what can they say in an email? To say thanks and hope you will reconsider. Now, I will say my first thought is if they've already offered a job to somebody else that you may not be able to get them to reconsider, but you certainly can keep up the conversation. So, what's your take on that? Do you think you should ask to reconsider or just try to
Um,
keep the relationship and be thankful?
yeah, I mean, I think I like your approach better, where you're being thankful, you're still keeping the lines of communication open, express your eagerness. So maybe a similar situation is going to come out, another job posting is going to come for the exact same position. Maybe that person won't work out. So think about and a third thing, I think I have a LinkedIn post on this. A third thing is maybe that's a networking contact for you. So maybe it didn't work out, but maybe that recruiter knows of another company that's hiring for a similar position. So I absolutely love your idea of just staying in there. I had a client who, she did not get the job. She was crushed. It came down to her and another person, and absolutely perfect job. She was so crushed. And after she picked herself up off the floor and was able to, she kept the lines of communication open. And she just once in a while, I would say like every couple, 3-4 weeks, she would email the person that she met with, the hiring manager, and maybe she noticed something that was about that company in the news, or maybe she just touched base with them. And he remembered her. So then when they had another position open, the company was going through a growth period, had another position open, who did he go to first? Her. So yes, absolutely follow up, stay in there. You don't know what's going to happen down the road. And just like Annette said, be nice. That can take you a long way.
Yeah, you never do know. I mean, I was hired for my first writing job, which I was thrilled to get, and ended up being hired. I applied for the position, and they had just hired somebody, and they were there for 6 months, and they had to let them go. So,
Yeah.
you never know. I'm sure there's some kind of a percentage somewhere about how many people just do not work out, when they
Right.
are hired. Either they don't work out from the company side, or it doesn't work out from
Mhm.
the employee side, where they decide, what, one side or the other, this is just not a good fit.
Right,
um
or maybe you see that interviewer at an industry event, and if because you've maintained that relationship, you feel more comfortable going up to them and saying, "Hey, how you doing, Tom?" And then, that you never know what's going to happen out of that conversation.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. It's so much of when you're leaving your old position, to not burn the bridges. If you don't get a
Mhm.
job, don't burn those bridges, but
Mhm.
keep them active, because I always think that, industries are small and memories are long, and, you may be leaving a coworker that you can't stand in one job, and then, they may end up being your boss in another one, or vice versa,
Mhm.
or something like that. And you just don't know what people are saying and thinking. Um, so we have, so thank you so much, everybody, for being there
For
and
sure.
all these questions. This is just so much fun for us. So somebody's mentioning about, sussing out the work environment remotely. And that, I guess that's a great question also, because, um, you may not wish to pursue the position if after the first or second interview, even if they're interested in you, you might not be interested in them. So what's some advice for that?
Well, it's tricky. I mean, like we said before, especially remotely, going with those gut feelings and really kind of examining when you feel something that, a lot of times I talk with a client like, I ignored the signs. I so ignored the signs. So
Guilty.
yeah, I would say don't ignore the signs. And then, I think there are some social sites that have research. So glassdoor.com is one of them. I always recommend taking it with a grain of salt though. So you can go into the reviews within Glassdoor and they can be skewed because some company, well, first of all, a lot of people write negative reviews because they're disgruntled, where a lot of people, if they're had a positive experience with the company, might not write a review, just like any other, like a Yelp review.
Yep.
So so take it with a grain of salt, but you can get little nuggets in there. If you're starting to like look at reviews and see themes that, okay, they're always talking about this, that might be something to ask some questions about in a nice way in an interview to try to gain some more information.
Yeah, no, that's true. What do they say? Something negative, gets around the world in like a minute, and something positive it takes like 3 days. Or there's different variations on
Yeah.
that type of a thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And people just, they don't, uh, you know, you never know. You just never know. So, so here's someone who had an interview with the CEO, was getting moved to the hiring manager, but never had a chance. Um, so I'm not sure what you mean by never had a chance. I'm guessing that you weren't called back. If you want to clarify that in the chat, we can address it. I will say that I know of times where you just never know what happens with a job. When I was a recruiter, I had a candidate that I was working with. They loved her. They loved her. She went in. She met everybody here. They asked her to fly to like the headquarters for the final, stamp of approval. And I was so excited. She was so excited. And Monday came and we didn't hear anything about the flight. And it turned out that they just decided not to fill the job, or things like that happen. And so obviously it's very disappointing, but a lot of times things happen and you just never find out about them.
Right.
um
And like COVID is such a good example of that, the ups and downs of COVID and the budgets that companies have had and not had days later. Tricky. When I worked, so much was dependent on our quarterly numbers. So we would have tons of requisitions open, and then management would sometimes come down and say, we have to put on a hiring freeze. And then our
yeah.
team would like get shifted to other areas and do more. Like I would always move to training and development and be more of a trainer then for a couple months. And we'd ride out some economic waves. So yes, very, very tricky. And it's not always the recruiter's fault.
Yeah, I know. That's why I left
Mhm.
recruiting. I could not stand being in the middle,
Mhm.
and being, pulled in two different ways, and it was just made me crazy.
Mhm.
So this is something that, I have strong feelings about this, and I'm curious to hear what you're going to say though. What are your feelings on turning down a job knowing that you have been looking for a while and are afraid you might not get another offer? To follow up, can you continue to look if you take this job and look for something better? So I guess that's kind of a double question. First, should you take the job you don't want, or not? And then if you do take it, should you continue to look? So I have my thoughts. I'm curious to hear what you're going to say.
I think that it is tricky because if you are the breadwinner and you have to provide for your family, I say all bets are off. So if you have to provide for your family and you have to take a job that's going to get you through, I think then you have to do that. And I understand that. But from a recruiter's perspective, we hated that so bad because, oh my gosh, we finally get the role filled and then we train them and then they're off. But so I get it though. I mean, I think at times you got to do what you have to do. And I do not fault people for doing what's best for their family. A lot of times as a resume writer, I maybe you do this too, and I sometimes work with clients that will want a certain job target and it might be out of reach, or maybe there aren't that many jobs open in that field. And then they might want a different resume for something else that's a little bit more attainable. And we might work on both types of resumes in order to target those types of jobs and in order to target these type of jobs because they have to pay the bills.
Yeah. So what is your position, and take the job and then just keep looking on the, on the side?
Yeah. I mean, I would say, I would hope that people wouldn't do that. That's really difficult for the company. But if they're in a financial position where they need to do that, I think that all bets are off. What are your thoughts?
No, I agree with you. I have had times when, I did take a job and I didn't want the job, but I took it anyway. I was single for a long time, single and actually, supporting myself and going to get my
Mm-hmm.
degree at night. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a rough time, but, I think it does also depend on, on your situation. I spent many years where, I could afford to leave a job because I could, get a job as a bartender or a waitress or something like
Mm-hmm.
that, to tide me over while I was looking. So,
Mm-hmm.
I think like a lot of things in the career field, it depends on your situation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so
Can I
Paul,
add one point to that?
of
I also
course.
think like there's so many people have examples of times where they took a job where it wasn't quite right, or they just needed to in order to pay the bills, and they parlayed it into something else. They it was their foot in the door. So sometimes people, it can't always feel 100% right. Sometimes there are reservations. And for as many people who say, oh, I wish I would have done things differently, there are a lot of people who say, like, that taught me something. And I'm glad I took that customer service job because I learned a lot about the company before I moved on to the HR job. And I
Mhm.
was better able to recruit for those positions because I knew I had worked in a department that worked with so many different departments. So, sometimes taking that job that's not quite right, I know we're saying it depends again, but sometimes there are millions of examples of where that worked out well for people.
Well, the thing is, if there were answers to those things, or if, we had a crystal ball, we'd be making millions.
Yeah.
Just there's so many things, that there's so many variables. And, we have, someone did clarify the message, and just to notice, if we don't mention your name, a lot of people, if we're not connected, or if you have your settings set a certain way, you just come up in our message as a LinkedIn user. So, we don't know who you are when we're looking at the feed here, because it's different than on LinkedIn. So just to thank you, Tom shared a couple things. Same thing you just said. You can take the job and then realize that you love it, and there may be other opportunities there. And then
Yeah.
twice he had candidates in mid-flight to job interview, and they received an email. The position had been filled, when they landed, that they had the email. So, that happened to my husband. He was looking for a job many years ago when he was still working in corporate, and he interviewed with them, and they loved him and he loved them, and he was on the train. We live near Midtown Manhattan, big commuter area. And so he was on the train, and he went into the office because, they were there, they were going to be making him the offer, and he was excited and blah, blah, blah. And he got in there, and they said, we love you, but we just have to tell you that one of our employees had relocated to the West Coast and has now had something come up with family, and he and his family want to move back to the East Coast. So, we're giving him that job, which is good for them. They should do
Yeah.
that. But
And it was
you,
nice that they were honest with him.
I'm sorry.
It was nice that they were honest with him.
Yeah, it was. But the thing is that you never know what's going to happen. So,
Mhm.
Somebody is, oh, that's nice. Somebody is thanking Tom for all the great information. Yes, we thank you, Tom. We love you. Um, so this person just clarified it, and he was talking about that he talked to the CEO and moved to the hiring manager, bantered back and forth on email, and never got a chance to talk to her, but she never mentioned a phone call, et cetera, et cetera. So, it's this person said they wish that they could have called her rather than an email to fix this. You know, I'm sorry that you had that experience, that things like that happen to everyone. And, it's a drag. It's a
Yeah.
drag. Do you have any advice that how somebody could have, I'm not sure if you're emailing back and forth, if you should be mentioning the call. I mean, what do you think, Paula?
Yeah, I don't quite understand the question, but I do think that just know, I mean, I guess know that you're not alone. There's a lot of examples of people who have stories like that from interviewing where unfortunately things didn't go well and they were snubbed. So for all of those though, keep at it. It's something that if you keep doing the things and keep your head up and keep your shoulders back and keep getting yourself out there, it will happen. It's just stinks sometimes. And I wish I had a better explanation than that. There are really, really great recruiters and great people who work in this world. And then there's just a few bad apples that kind of taint it for all of us sometimes.
Yeah, it is so true. It is so true. And to be fair, to the recruiters, it happens to them as well, where
Mm-hmm.
they have a candidate and the candidate is all excited and blah blah blah, and then the candidate ghosts them. So
Mm-hmm.
not trying to make an excuse for anybody, but it really, really does happen on both sides. So okay, so Tom is talking to somebody who's watching our LinkedIn live
Awesome.
stream.
That's
So
great.
that's great. So we are actually, kind of, it's been just about an hour here, Paula. So I just like to ask, because I wanted to talk. There's so many things I wanted to talk about that we just didn't get to because we had such great engagement.
Yeah.
But what is one thing that you would want to add, before we say goodbye here? That I haven't asked you, nobody else has asked you, that you think is really important to say?
Oh, one thing I didn't get to that I really wanted to. So, a lot of people have heard of the STAR format for answering questions. So, if you haven't, you can Google that. Um, it's an acronym: situation, task, action, result. So, it's a formula for answering a question. So, it just kind of makes it more concise. And in your brain, it gives you, like, okay, here's a way to do it that is helpful. So what I heard about recently, so Miles Laughlin is you could connect with him on LinkedIn, and he is a director of career services at a university down in Texas. He did not make this up, but he shared it with me one time. So I don't know who made it up, but it's the SHARE acronym. So it's very similar, but I think it adds an important element. So we talked about it in the beginning, but SHARE is situation, hindrance, action, results. So that's pretty much the same as the STAR, but it adds the E, which is evaluation. So I believe that that evaluation part of your response is so important. I think that's the part where you're showing that you have the emotional intelligence of learning from what you did, taking away from it, maybe tying into that future company. So I like that SHARE acronym and a lot. You can Google that. And it's really a great way of kind of organizing information in your brain, but then also like, it's not that evaluation component, I think is really important for interviewing.
Yeah, I would think that that would really also come in handy if you are talking about the time you failed,
Yeah.
to use that to really
Yeah.
show that you understood kind of where things went off the rails, and maybe how it could have been different, and what you learned. for the future.
Mhm.
So I want to thank everyone so much for joining us today. I had a bunch of questions for Paula, and we could have talked about this. We could be here for another hour, I'm sure. Maybe she will come back,
Yes, I would love
and
that.
we can continue the conversation. But thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you spending your time with us because you could be somewhere else. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Annette, so much. Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here. This has been great, and have a great rest of your day and enjoy the weekend.